Are you live on this?
I'm live. Look, check and see. Look, are you on Facebook?
Yeah.
Check and see if it's right. See if it looks like that, because sometimes it comes up wrong.
And that ain't improved since.
Yeah. And the name is on the tip of
I mean, everything's fun. It's just, they just do really upset Joe.
Amy said on Wednesday, I don't know. I asked her if it was sanctuary, but things got crazy this afternoon, and I don't have more details in there, but I do know there is a service planned Wednesday. I'm right early.
Well, you have to come. That's good that you are there.
I started trying to work on sanctuary, and I'm very good.
That's the way I've been.
Skip, the owner of the house, he was kind of keeping up.
So you
I'm really glad to be
it's still so. That's probably.
Wednesday at 1 o'clock.
Does it come up right?
Yeah. So,
Let me stand up there.
I'm standing up there. That's that.
Why aren't we on there?
I don't know.
Well, that's weird.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Okay, so we're good.
It's kind of weird.
It is kind of
It's
weird
like-
looking at
it's
yourself
like-
on there.
That's like,
Yeah.
That is just too much techno.
Too much techno, right?
We just checked that. He's on the live Facebook. It's like too much techno. Like standing there. It does. It's like, it's so weird.
Set bound.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's good that that's, you did the right thing there. You can't let it, man. Our other two really already. He don't welcome. Try to help her.
This is
He's 15 years into recovery, 13 years. Rachel, he was 13 years in addiction. And he got most of those things when he was in addiction, so he could handle it. It's all in his family. If this was supposed to be, you probably have a factory ready to start by.
Hey, good. How are you doing? You come by yourself tonight?
He's family.
Where's your son? Is he still in Georgia? All right.
Oh yeah, yeah. See, I don't know him. There's this guy. Kissing. Have a night. Tell stories. However, I would know that today. Come here. He's making practice.
So it didn't really. So I just called the next day,
How are you guys doing? I saw that you signed up for the family training. Did you? Did you know your name's on the list, or did somebody put it on there? Okay. Oh, we're going to talk about that on Thursday night. You won't be the only one that does that. So, yeah, we'll figure it out. All right, guys, we'll get the show on the road. Carol, can you shut that door back there, please? People can join us as they come in. Welcome, everybody. My name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at Favor Greenville. This is our family recovery group. I always like to say that because we got a lot of different meetings going on here at Favor Greenville, and sometimes people will wander into this group. Sometimes it will be the person who's, seeking recovery themselves, and they'll be sitting in the meeting and they'll think they're at a recovery meeting, and all of a sudden they'll realize it's a family recovery meeting, and they'll get terrified. Like, I'm on the other side of it now. Let me get out of here as quick as I can. You're welcome to be here if you're in recovery. If you share, we want you to share from a family, from a perspective that would help the family understand what's going on. it isn't a recovery meeting in general. So if you're in here and you're in recovery, keep that in mind. Can we get the lights and turn the lights on back there? Those guys will fall asleep if the lights are out back there. I mean, who did that? Who turned the lights down like that? A little bit about my background. So this is who I am professionally: a therapist, a clinician, a trauma therapist, this and that, an interventionist. I've worked in a lot of traditional clinical settings. I've run inpatient rehabs, kind of got started in the field in community mental health, working in what back in the day used to be called dual diagnosis programs. It's now called co-occurring disorders. People have both mental health and substance use. And I'm a certified EAP professional, meaning I can work with corporations. I'm a certified substance abuse professional, meaning if you get a DUI, I can give you an official evaluation. You have to get different credentials to do different types of work in this field. So that's who I am professionally. Personally, I'm also in long-term recovery. So for me, it's been 16 years since I've had a drink or a drug. My deal was, I was probably addicted to alcohol way before I was addicted to drugs. Alcohol was always present. The first substance I picked up was alcohol at the age of 14. On a side note, we know that the biggest predictor in terms of developing a problem is the age when you start. Age of first use is what they call it. And the younger you are, the greater at risk you are in terms of starting regular use. So one of the most sensible federal laws is wait till you're 21. It may be the only sensible federal law, but that wasn't a political thing, guys. That was just loosen up the mood a little bit. But I mean, if you wait till you're 21, you reduce the likelihood that you're going to develop a problem by about 95%. So it's a big deal. It's even a bigger predictor than whether or not it runs into your family. So I'm 14. The first thing I did was take a drink. And it didn't take off immediately from there. It wasn't like I went 0 to 60. It was more like it kind of creeped into my life, if that makes sense. It snuck up on me. I wasn't obsessed to drink right away. Then I tried different things when I went off to school. But ultimately, where this thing really went haywire in my life was prescription opioids. So in 1999, I was in a car accident. This was right at the beginning of the period of time whenever doctors were told you're not allowed to experience pain. So it was prime time territory for an opiate addiction. And I got, really, really strung out really, really quickly, guys. And I knew my way around a party, and I knew my way around a lot of different substances. I got to tell you something. I never experienced anything like opiates. And I'm not here to say that like one drug is more addictive than another drug. I don't feel like there's really a lot of purpose in that. I know in my life, I never had an experience like I had when I became addicted to pills. They pushed everything out. And then, thank God, I found recovery. I found recovery 16 years ago, and did a lot of meetings, did a lot of therapy, did a lot of counseling, and that was my journey to get me to where I am today from a recovery perspective. I'm also a person who's dealt with this in their family as well. So that's sort of what I bring to the table. And if you haven't been here before, guys, we kind of approach this thing in a little bit of a different way. Every other week we do a lecture like we're doing tonight. Now let me give my disclaimer at the beginning of this lecture. So the first thing I want to tell you is that this is not a therapy group. This is a self-help mutual support group. I am mutually supporting you. I just happen to be a therapist. Don't hold that against me. So if you're going to therapy, or if you're seeing a psychiatrist, or you're involved in another program, keep going. Keep doing what you're doing. This isn't meant to replace anything. It's meant to supplement. Does that make sense? So that's the first thing. The second thing is you're going to hear my opinion today, based on my personal experience and my professional experience, based on my 16 years of recovery and my 16 plus years working in the field of mental health and substance use disorder. Everybody may not agree with me. Now, understand something. They're all wrong. But I want to let you know that you may hear, if you talk to 10 different people about recovery-related issues, you may get 10 different opinions on that. What you're getting tonight is just kind of my take on things. So keep that in mind. And if it doesn't make sense, then seek out other information. This isn't all about who's right and who's wrong. You got to do what you need to do for your particular situation. And I'm going to talk about even other types of support groups tonight. Whatever works for you is what you want to follow. So you're getting kind of like the Rich Jones view on addiction and family recovery tonight. So what I want to talk about is this idea of codependency. How many people by show of hand have heard the term codependency? Let's get real controversial right off the bat. I think it's a bunch of, I won't use inappropriate language. I don't buy into the codependency only model that's been put out there. I think there is such a thing as codependency, and I think it makes sense to a certain extent, especially when you're dealing like spouses. It really applies a lot for spouses. But where parents and children are concerned, to label parents as codependent, I take a little bit of an exception to that. What appears to be codependency is really just basic gut instincts trying to save your child. And when you're labeled an enabler and you're labeled a codependent, that has a real negative vibe to it. And I just don't think that we should apply it across the board. So I'm going to talk about other ways of thinking about this tonight. I am going to talk about codependency, but I am going to talk about other ways of thinking it. I also want to go on the record, I don't work for a rehab. Favor Greenville has nothing to do with rehabs. We refer a lot of people, but we're 100% independent, so I'm not going to try to talk anybody into getting their loved one to go to rehab tonight. Okay, this is just 100% information, and you'll take it and you'll do what you can with it. So I'm going to go through this. I'm going to talk about options, but I do want to talk about one thing that makes everything more difficult than it's ever been in terms of my experience working in the field. One of the things that has changed everything is this issue of fentanyl and carfentanil. And this is more an educational process for you guys. And we really need to, our kids need to know this, and everybody in our community needs to understand this. You know, what's going on is people are taking, and you can see this picture of a penny, and this is meant to kind of describe exactly what the small amount of fentanyl is that is lethal. So if you picture that proportion, that's about what? Maybe like a pinch. So you can pick a pinch of salt can kill you. And so that's really one of the dilemmas that we're dealing with. And this is why we have to take every single situation. If a person's using heroin or a person's, even if they're using pills, we have to take that so seriously, guys, because counterfeit pills now, people are taking this substance and they're mixing it into pills, and people really don't know what they're getting a hold of. So everything that I talk about tonight, as we go through it, apply it to your situation and be asking yourselves, how quickly do we have to move in these circumstances? And if people are using heroin and people are using pills, there's a higher level of urgency around those issues. It just is what it is. And I'm not saying that we should wait for somebody to get really, really bad when they're drinking alcohol. That's not what I mean. I don't believe in the concept of hitting bottom for anyone. But I really don't believe in the concept of hitting bottom where these substances are concerned. These substances are known as fentanyl and carfentanil and other kind of synthetic analogs that are out there. Does anyone have any questions about this right off the bat, if they're dealing with this? Or does anybody have any questions about this issue that I could help clear up right from the beginning?
Maybe
Yes.
Where would you typically see that being used that a young person could get their hands
I think for the first place that it's most likely to come up with would be in heroin. So it mostly would be cut with heroin. They would use fentanyl or carfentanil to cut heroin to increase the potency and kind of get more bang for their buck. They can stretch the product, if you will. The second place, and maybe with kids this is even a bigger concern, is fake Xanax. So for whatever reason, everybody's a big fan of Xanax now. Xanax is everywhere in Greenville County. In some ways, I would make an argument that Xanax is more prevalent than even opiates, especially if you're looking at like teenagers and young adults. This is based on people coming into favor. So Xanax can be, what they will do is they'll take the raw substance and they'll get a homemade pill press and they'll press it themselves and it'll be fake Xanax. And they'll pass it off and they'll sell it to people as Xanax. And the reality is the kids really don't know what they're getting. They don't know what they're getting. And I talk to these guys and we try to educate them, and they have little tricks of the trade that they think that they can tell, and there are ways to always be able to tell. You know, when you break when you break a real Xanax, it snaps. When you break a fake Xanax, it crumbles, that kind of stuff. So this is the way that they're monitoring this. But this is really the danger. This is why it takes on a more heightened sense of awareness. And there's more of an issue with this if you think your loved one is messing with pills or messing with heroin. Any other questions about this particular issue? Yes?
Is fentanyl cheap?
Fentanyl is cheap in turn. It's not necessarily really cheap, but you use such a small amount that I guess, relatively speaking, economies of scale, it is cheap. And you can really take a small amount of heroin and stretch it a really long way if you use this substance. So any other questions about this before we move into the regular part of the program tonight?
Where are you talking about high schoolers and stuff?
I'm talking about high schoolers and young adults primarily, but yes.
Where are the high schoolers getting it from? Are they getting
You buy these pills off the street. They buy them from one another. You buy them off the street. Like I said, people are now pressing these things in their basements, quite frankly. If you go online, and actually I don't know if you should do this because I'm not sure you want it in your search history. But if you Google like pill press, you can order one. You probably can order one for Christmas. You know, you can probably get it shipped via Amazon. It's not illegal to own a pill press, and that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. And really, the drug that's being passed off is Xanax. I almost think that we have a bigger issue with Xanax than we do with opioids in Greenville County. That is the most common thing that we hear. And when I say young people, I guess I'm speaking pretty broadly, like 18 to 30 kind of deal, 16 to 30, that kind of age range. What other questions? Yes?
What does it do to the body when you take it?
It shuts down your respiratory system. You go to sleep and don't wake up. You stop breathing. That kind of thing. Suppresses your respiratory system. And obviously when people are doing this, they're not trying to kill people. So this is the deal. That isn't what's going on. It's a very inexact science. It's a very inexact science. Yes, sir.
What kind of high is it giving them? I mean, why do they want to take it?
Well, first of all, they're not sure that they're taking this. You guys get that part? The question was, what kind of high does it give that people would want to take it? They don't know they're taking that. They're not going out. There are some people who will say, I'm seeking fentanyl. If you have a really high tolerance or something like that, maybe then you would seek fentanyl. But most people aren't going after the fentanyl. They think they're taking a Xanax. They think they're taking a Xanax just like they took a Xanax last week or they took a Xanax on Wednesday. That kind of thing. So you got to find a way to impart this information to your kids in a way that they're going to listen to you. You guys know what I mean by that? Do you guys know that have you ever talked to a teenager and you're really, you're almost 100% sure that they're not listening to a word you're saying? Even though they're looking you in the eye while you're talking to them and they're nodding their head and they're saying, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Have you ever had that experience? They're very gifted at that. So you have to say this in a way that they actually hear it. And, I don't know that I know the perfect answer for how do you get like a risk-taking teenager, right? There are certain kids that have a personality type that are risk takers. Would we all agree with that?
Yeah.
Impulsive, indestructible, bulletproof. How do you get that kid to listen to the potential dangers of this issue? You probably have to say it in a way where it doesn't come off like you're confronting them. You probably have to deliver it in a way like, hey, Rich, can I just tell you something? I went to Favor tonight. This is what I learned about this stuff. Did you know that this is going on? Have you known anyone who was dealing with this? Get the information out and try to appeal to the idea that most people, we don't want to self-destruct. Even when we're reckless, even when we're out there doing our thing, we really do want to live. That's not what's going on. We're not on a covert suicide mission. And so try to play to their sensibilities around this. Do you know that when you're taking these pills that you think you know so well and your buddies gave to you, that you probably aren't even sure what you're taking? You're probably not even 100% sure what you're taking. Have those type of conversations. If they're using heroin, talk to them about all options for recovery, including medication-assisted treatment. Do not let people tell you that they have to do recovery any certain way. Try to get people to come into places like Favor where we're going to have a conversation with them in a very open and honest manner. You want to get them involved in you want to get them involved in some type of program or encourage them to reach out. Or we have a hotline, and I'll make sure I get the cards. If you call that hotline, our hotline will give your loved one a call. You can call the hotline and say, Rich's number, 864-764-8504. Can you please give him a call? And our staff will call your loved one. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Like, it's taken on a little bit of a higher sense of urgency if this is what you're dealing with. What other questions or comments about this issue? Yes, ma'am.
When they make the pills with the stuff, do they have the numbers on them? Like most pills have?
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, it's a great question. Her question was, do they actually make the pills look fake? They're straight counterfeit pills, man. They got the little thing on the side. And people will say to me, Rich, you can tell if you get these. Like, you can actually tell what you're getting. But a lot of people will take them anyway because they just spent money on them and stuff like that. I haven't personally experienced what that looks like, and is there a difference? But I know for sure it's scored like a regular pill on the side. And it's mostly being passed off as Xanax, but technically it could be passed off as any pill, right? It could be passed off as any pill. They could take this and they could put this substance into it. So super important to try to educate our kids on this matter. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments or suggestions on how to have this conversation? Don't go home from here and be like, I was over in favor, you're going to die. Please don't do that. That won't be received well. Believe it or not, it's kind of like back in the day when they used to tell that. There was another generation where they told that marijuana was going to kill you. Kids now think that adults are being the same way about pills. I know that doesn't make any sense, but it's a cultural shift. So if we come at this the wrong way, we're going to get shut out. We're going to 100% get shut out, and they're going to think that we're what? It's just old people doing what old people do, trying to ruin our weekend. All right. The second thing I want to make sure I go over this every time. Now, if you've been through this before, that's okay. Just, but by the time you're done with this group, you will be an expert on what the signs and symptoms of addiction are. And if you're ever on Jeopardy and you win, I want you to remember me. There's a difference between heavy partying and addiction. Not everybody who drinks too much or uses too much or has a bad night is addicted. This is from the DSM-5. Here's the DSM-5. It has about 370 different diagnoses in it. I always joke that if you give me enough time, I'll find one that applies to you. And under the substance-related disorders, here are the criteria. Tolerance. It takes more and more of the substance to get the same effect. Withdrawal. When you don't have the substance, you get sick. When you get the substance, the sickness goes away. Craving, that's an internal thing. Preoccupation, it runs through your mind. You think about it all the time when you don't have it. That's a huge one right there. You wouldn't even know if your loved one was going through it. But this is Rich's opinion, but this is a hallmark symptom. This is something that really made it different, that differentiated me from my friends. When we didn't have it, I was thinking about it. When they didn't have it, they could take it or leave it. Inability to cut down, exactly as it sounds. You try to drink less, you try to use less, but you're unsuccessful. Inability to control. You had an intention of drinking 2 or 3 beers, you drank 23 beers. Used to happen to me all the time. It was weird. Physical danger. Keep using in situations where you can get hurt. Great deal of time. It's like a full-time job. Work or school problems. Social activities only involve drinking or using. And you have interpersonal problems. If you meet 6 or more of those criteria over the course of a year, you meet what's called substance use disorder severe, what used to be called dependency. Anybody ever hear the terms drug dependency? It used to be called drug dependency. The word addiction really never appeared in this diagnostic manual, which is very interesting. That word never appeared. From a medical point of view, it's called substance use disorder severe. And that's as close as you get to a diagnosis. The reason why I put that out is sometimes people will struggle with the idea of how severe is this problem. Let's take, for example, if you're dealing with young people. A lot of times there's sort of like this boys will be boys sort of mentality. How do you distinguish between this is normal, they're going to grow out of it, versus this is something different. And the closest we have to this is this diagnostic process. There is no x-ray. There is no x-ray. There is no brain scan. If there was a brain scan, it would look something like this. What you have on my right, your left, or excuse me, wait, my right, your right. But if I go like this, it's my left. You see how smart I am? All right. So what you have, this is a normal brain. And this is what's going on here is there's a neurotransmitter called dopamine. It allows us to experience pleasure. It allows us to have a normal day. It allows us to be content. Over time, dopamine is depleted in an addictive brain. And that's what you have in this side of the process. So this is what leads to seeking the drugs. This is what leads to seeking alcohol. You're trying to relieve this ever-present, it's not depression, it's just discontent. It's an inability to experience pleasure. If you've ever been in a situation with your loved one that you're just scratching your head, I can't believe he just did that. He knew he was going to get drug tested at work, and he went ahead and used anyway. She knew that if she drank again, she'd have to leave the house, but she drank again anyway. He knew that if he got caught again, he's going to get kicked off the football team. All those things. What's going on is that the person is going around with this inability to experience any kind of pleasure. So in the back of their mind, what are they doing? They're seeking this substance. They're thinking about this substance. They're preoccupied with this substance. This is an actual brain scan. There's a seat up front if you want to. So this is an actual brain scan, guys. So this is where it moves from the theoretical to a little bit more of what I would consider scientific evidence. You don't have to be a brain surgeon or a neurobiologist to say there's something different going on here. Would we agree with this? So what I'm trying to get you in touch with is this is something other than bad behavior. And I'm not making an excuse for your loved one. I'm not making it okay for them to do what they're doing. That's not at all what I'm saying. This is a treatable issue. There's a way to get better from substance use disorder. So there's no excuse for the bad stuff that goes on. But what I'm telling you is it's not as simple as willpower. And it's not as simple as tighten it up, Rich, get your act together. Pray a little harder, go to church a little more, go to school and get your act together, get a new job. All those things will not work because those aren't going to work any more than it would work for fixing a broken leg. So this is our version of an x-ray, I guess. We don't have the means or it would cost too much to give every single person a brain scan. I think it'd be really fun to do that, though. I think it'd be really fun, like one day a favor, it's brain scan day. And everybody comes in and you throw them in one end of the MRI and they go out and they wait for their results and they're like, gee, I'm addicted. Let me go through again and get a second opinion.
I got a question.
Yes.
So people starting out, everybody's brain pretty much looks the same, and then, or if you were to do a brain scan on someone young, would you be able to tell whether they were going to have the addictive personality?
It's fascinating. That's actually never been studied, but there's a theory that says that some of us are born with lower amounts of dopamine. It's called the dopamine deficiency hypothesis. And I don't know that it's actually ever been tested at scale where a lot of people have had. You'd have to just randomly give brain scans to people and see if you come up with people who have less dopamine. But there is a theory that that's what's going on. So if this was a normal brain, you might see my brain even had a little bit less. And that made me more likely to pick up, but also get more enjoyment out of it when I did pick up. Make the payoff more. So think of it this way. Think of a scale 1 to 10. If you're walking around at an 8, like 10 is normal dopamine, but I'm walking around at an 8, and I pick up, and I get up to like a 16, can you see how that's a bigger payoff than a person who has normal amount of dopamine? I know for sure, guys, and I can only tell you this is my experience. And I, you know, what I do professionally, I spend a lot of time reflecting on this. I read a lot about this. I study a lot about this, and I reflect on it. I can tell you, there was something about substances that changed me in a way where I almost instantly was like, I want more of that. I want more of that. I want more of that. And I also have the experience where I have friends, I have family members who did the same stuff I did, who the same age, from a family where addiction was running in the family, and they could just take it or leave it. They could just take it or leave it. So it appears, if I had to answer that question, that there's something different about my response to these chemicals than other people. I will also tell you, though, everybody's different. We got to be careful that we don't paint with a cookie cutter or like a too broad a brush. We got to understand, like your loved one, everybody's experience can be different. Not everybody's going to have the same exact background as me or the same exact response. So we have to really, really get the person in touch with what's going on with them personally. What we do in recovery rooms and what we do in treatment rooms is we paint with a very broad brush and we tell everybody, you're a garden variety, such, and so you need to follow this cookie cutter recovery plan. We want to avoid doing that. We've got to come to a conclusion on where we're at with this. Now, if somebody asks me, Rich, did I cross the line? What should I do? I'm always going to tell them what? You should probably quit everything just to be safe. Because the only solution for this, not the only solution, but one of the most time-honored solutions is you back off, you don't do anything, and your brain starts to recover. The good news is you come back online. This isn't a permanent condition. The lights start flickering. Then they come back on fully. Any other questions or comments about the brain? Yes?
Can we administer dopamine at a low level so that you come back to a normal state and taper it off as you start to produce it again?
Could they manipulate it, you mean? See, the problem with anything that produces dopamine is it's also usually euphoric, a feeling that goes along with it. So I guess technically, there may be they could try to do something like that. The idea would be that it would be very hard to manage because the person's already demonstrated an inability to manage that kind of stuff. And it would lead to that seeking behavior. It would lead to that drug-seeking behavior, that out-of-control behavior, that nonsensical head scratching. You guys have all been in that situation where you're looking at your, mom and dad are looking at each other. You're looking, what the heck were they thinking? What is going on here? Why would they do that? That if you start messing with anything that raises dopamine is going to push you back to that process. There are things that naturally raise dopamine. There are certain supplements that raise dopamine. Exercise raises dopamine. Being in this room and talking with one another raises dopamine. There are certain things you can do to naturally enhance dopamine. Your diet raises dopamine. But for the most part, if you take a pill or you take something to put dopamine into your system, you're sort of setting that process off. Anything else about the brain? Yes.
National Geographic had something not too long about the transcranial magnetic therapy. What are they doing there when they do that?
So was it for addiction?
Yeah, particularly with work for cocaine addicts, supposedly.
So I have to honestly say I don't know. I don't know what that's about.
Okay.
So he's talking about some breakthroughs that may be going on related to certain substances.
Well, basically they're putting
They're stimulating that part of the brain.
A wand basically is going near your brain.
Yeah.
And stimulating a part of your body
your
brain that kind of reroutes things.
I could see. I think that one of the great tragedies we have is that people stop studying addiction. We felt like we found a solution when we invented rehabs. And once we invented rehabs, we really stopped studying it. We sort of said, here's the solution for it. Go to 12-step meetings, find recovery through 12-step meetings, and live happily ever after. And addiction's it sort of stopped. All the research around it stopped. Those solutions, the research around solutions stopped. They still studied the brain and what was going on with the brain, but people really didn't look for creative solutions like that. I'm sure that you're going to see in the future things like that will start to come on board. There's all kinds of hope, guys, in the long term for this. This doesn't help you guys today, and we're not here to try to figure that out, but I believe what you'll see is there'll be a fundamentally different approach for addiction services in the future. There will be very, very individualized solutions like that. Yes, Linda?
All the rehabs that my son went to, they threw antidepressants. Well, you're depressed because you're coming off of this. It seemed like he was on Lexapro, you name it.
So there's a higher correlation. The question or the comment was about antidepressants and depression and things like that. And there's definitely a higher correlation between mental health and substance use, you'll see a higher prevalence among patients who have mental health issues. So it's not uncommon for people to be treated with antidepressants. What I'll tell you is antidepressants aren't as dangerous as some of the other drugs, some of the other prescription drugs that are being passed around. I think we've talked about this in here before, but there's a safe medication guide. And I'd recommend, if you want to know about medications, it's called Talbot, Talbott, Talbot Safe Medication Guide. If you Google that bad boy, they'll give you a list. And they put them in 3 categories. And the 3 categories are, category A is stay away from it. Danger, danger. Only if you absolutely, are in a horrible situation. That would be like a pain pill, right? Category B is you can use this under doctor's supervision, or if it's indicated, that would be something like maybe like Sudafed or something like that. Category C would be really, this isn't dangerous from an addiction standpoint. And a lot of the antidepressants fall into category C. So you should check that out if you have any questions about medication. All right, let's move into this whole idea of codependency. We're going to talk real quick about this. Again, I'm going to try to throw out some new ideas, but the idea of codependency is basically one person becomes enmeshed with another person. You don't know where you end and they begin. You don't know where they end and you begin. And when they move, you move. If they're having a bad day, you're having a bad day. If they're having a good day, you're having a good day. That kind of thing. The codependent person becomes conditioned with certain responses, a lot of rescuing behaviors, a lot of enabling behaviors. And then the idea becomes that you almost, like the codependent person, almost becomes addicted to the addict and is almost powerless over changing their behavior. And this is, a lot of the solutions around this would be like things like Al-Anon or Nar-Anon, those groups where they would talk about it's primarily a spiritual solution, that kind of a deal. So that's the idea of codependency. And codependency really, if you get into the roots of it, it had a lot to do with wives dealing with husbands. And some of the skills that go along with that are things like detachment. Being able to detach from the other person's behavior. Being able to take care of yourself and that kind of thing. So that's the idea of codependency. And it's a very legitimate philosophy. It's a very legitimate therapeutic point of view. I happen to believe that it applies more to spouse relationships than it does necessarily parents to kids. I just think when you start talking about parents to kids, it starts to take on a little bit of a different tone, although parents can become codependent with their children, right? What kind of factors or what kind of things do you say to yourself, and whether you're asking, am I in this codependent zone? What kind of things do you think play into that? Anybody have any thoughts? Carol?
When my daughter was first using, she wouldn't pay her bills because she was using her money for drugs. I would always rescue her and pay her bills for her.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a really codependent thing to do.
That's a codependent thing to do. So that happened that happened early in her addiction, late in her
addiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I started getting pissed off at her.
Right.
So then I quit doing that. But
one of the remedies for codependency is pissed offness. If you haven't experienced it, give it a try sometime.
that'll get you there quick.
That'll get you there quick.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually true if you think about it. Getting angry, what does getting angry do? It moves you into an action stage.
That's right.
It gets you moving where otherwise you might not be moving. I mean, I think you should get angry at the situations that present themselves. You should appropriately express your feelings around that. Another thing that I believe, another thing that has to do with codependency is how long has the issue been going on? If the issue is just starting or you're early on in this process, it's hard for me to believe you're necessarily going through this codependent deal because you really don't know about it yet. You're kind of at the beginning of the journey. I think if it's been going on for 20 years, it's probably much more likely that you've developed a codependency on this situation. But early on, when you're dealing with this in your family, and early on, I mean the first few years, your head is just spinning. You don't even know what's going on. It's just hitting you. You're fearing for the person's life. You're up all night. You're never sleeping. You're anxiety-ridden. I think when you're first exposed to this, I really don't know if I can understand how I could look at a mom, for example, and say, you're codependent, detach. I feel like that's almost an illogical thing to say. Now, if it goes on for 5, 10, 20 years, I think you're looking at a different situation. Would you guys agree with that? Yeah. So to a certain degree, I think early on is probably different than the journey down the road. And again, that's just my take. That's 100% my take. You know, the solution for this, or the issue with this, if you kind of identify with this, there are a lot of support groups that deal with codependency. Al-Anon deals with codependency. Nar-Anon deals with codependency. We deal with it to a certain degree here. We have coaches that help you with that. There are therapists that will absolutely help you with codependency. What are some of the, if you've been through any kind of training or any kind of support around codependency, what are some of the things that they're going to teach you when it comes to dealing with codependency? Anybody have any experience that they would share with the group? Mary Kay?
For me, getting educated about what the addict goes through helped me take the emotional side out of it.
Okay.
So that I could then begin to quit thinking with my heart and began to think with my head. Whereas before I learned about the disease of addiction, I was scared that if I didn't do XYZ for my son, that he would maybe use to the point where he would, die.
Yeah.
Because he would be so stressed out. And if I could help him by paying his rent or getting him out of jail or doing all these things, that maybe he wouldn't use anymore.
So I think that's a great point. Most people come into dealing with an addiction in their family completely blind. You don't know what the heck you're dealing with. And so you have all these gut instinct reactions to the situation, and until you get educated on it, until you get some information and you come to, that's one of the reasons why we will always start every group that we have, every lecture that we have at Favor Greenville will always start with a picture of the brain. I joked at the beginning that if you've been here a lot, you've seen this picture of the brain so many times, you'll be able to give this lecture. That's kind of how we want it to be. We want you to become so familiar with this issue and understand what's going on with this issue that you become empowered to make different decisions. Education is power. So then in that case, and now where did you get that education? Favor Greenville. You got a lot of it here, right?
I did, but the first night I got the education, the very first time was when you sat in the meeting at Family Group at Pavilion.
Yeah.
Where my son was at that time, and Billy and I started to go to that family group. And you were the first person that ever sat down and said that I couldn't do anything that could make him use.
Yes, I remember that. So the conversation that Mary Kay and I had was, and it was coming from me as a professional, also as a person in recovery, that there's nothing that, when I was in active addiction, there was nothing that my mom was going to do on any given day that was going to make me use. Do you guys understand that? If you're in addiction, it takes on a whole different tone. You don't make your decisions based on what your family members are saying to you or doing. You're automatically going to use. Does that part make sense to everyone in here? You don't use only when things are going bad or when things are going good. You're on automatic pilot. Yes, sir.
It does make sense, but it's still just an absolute mystery to me.
Yeah.
And when you talk about 20 years, we're 26 years into this.
Yeah.
Our son's 42 years old, and we never have been able to figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's been 3 months up, 3 months down,
yeah,
3 months up, and I think we are definitely codependent. I think we're beginning to break out of it now, only because our other kids are pushing us.
Okay.
So
they're saying, what are they saying? Like, you got to knock this off?
They're just saying, Mom and Dad, you got to go get some help.
Yeah.
We've tried everything we can with our son, but it's impacting us and our family on the other side. And the other two boys are, one was a top fighter pilot in the Air Force, the other's a vice president of sales for a company, and they're just saying, enough.
Yeah. You'll see people will talk about when they feel like they're in a codependent kind of zone, the family members will feel like there was almost an intervention done on them to shake them out of the codependency before they could do anything with the loved one. It's almost like you intervene in order to do an intervention. do you feel like so? Because you said something interesting. You said, I get it. I get it. I've been educated, but it's still a mystery.
It is a mystery. What's a mystery to me is and one of the ways, I mean, we've done our share for sure of supplementing him and trying to bail him out and everything, but we've also done a lot of things to try to have him succeed, because he's really a smart guy. And the mysterious part about it is to us is it always seems like just about the time he's really getting successful, it's like he doesn't want to, and he just crashes.
Yeah, it is very hard to figure it out. I don't know if anyone here can relate if they've been through multiple relapses, for example, or multiple reoccurrences with their loved one. It's very hard to figure out the rhyme or reason behind it. It's very hard to get into that. And we would caution you to even try to do that, because it could drive you insane, guys. It can, if you try to figure out exactly what happened, because I can't tell you how many times I've been in conversations where I personally have witnessed this. I mean, I've been in a situation with somebody who the trajectory was definitely going in the right direction. And, you really are left scratching your head like, what the heck's going on here? Whereas you see somebody who's having a real rough time or something bad happens to them, we're conditioned to be like, the relapse is triggered by what? Divorce or death in the family or demotion or something. We're not used to the person doing great and then screwing up. That doesn't make any sense to us. If you look at it from a research standpoint, it's about a 50-50 likelihood. People will tell you that they will use to enhance good experiences. So like when the pendulum is swinging up, they'll use to make it a little bit better just as often as when it's swinging down to deal with it going down. Do you guys get that? We got to be careful, because we really will get into this mindset where when they're doing good, that's the good part. Now, at the end of the day, the person is responsible for their recovery. They need to be doing their recovery, whether they're doing great or whether they're doing poorly. Mary Kay?
I have a question from an addict standpoint. Do you think that if somebody...
Hold on. Anyone know an addict? Oh, that's right.
Somebody in recovery.
Yeah.
But if they're doing so well, do you think they get that false sense of security that I can control it, I can just use one time to enhance that?
I think it could be that. I think the other thing is, at the end of the day, the only person that could answer that is the person themselves.
Right.
So you'd have to get into a situation where you talk to that person and they took you through, maybe in a pretty detailed way, what was going on in their life. The other thing that sometimes happens is sometimes a person will use and their family won't know they have used. And they'll keep it together for a minute. This actually happens more often than you think. So Rich is doing fine. He's doing great. He's been in recovery for a year. And it looks like he's doing wonderful, but he's drinking here and there on the side. And the family doesn't know because it hasn't spun out of control yet. And then all of a sudden one day you get a phone call, I'm in the emergency room or I'm in jail, and you're like, where did this come from? Well, really there was stuff going on all along. The thing that we really emphasize, and we emphasize it with the people that are needing to do recovery, and we emphasize it with families, is you got to go for the tangible thing. What's the only thing that you can really measure related to recovery is whether or not the person is doing a recovery plan. That's the thing that you can actually see. That's the thing that I can actually touch. Am I going to meetings? Am I going to a therapist? Am I doing my program, whatever my program may be? Again, remember, we don't think that there's one size fits all in terms of what that program is, but if you're doing something, it logically increases the likelihood that you're going to be okay. So we always look for those indications. How is the person following a plan? Are they going to meetings? Are they going to a therapist? But at the end of the day, be careful trying to figure out exactly what it was. Be careful trying to figure out exactly what it was. If it happened and they screwed up, and screwed up isn't even the best way to say that, if they happened and they slipped up, really the only concern, or the only thing that a family member could do would be to encourage them to get right back on track. Just get right back on track. What other comments about that process? Anyone else? All right, so that's the kind of codependency idea around it. I want to take you through this idea that it also may be a trauma response. And some of Carol's behaviors when she was rescuing her daughter could have been codependent, but also may have been a trauma response. And once bitten by a snake, you're afraid even of a piece of rope. So repetitive exposures to dangers for your loved one may make you guys very, very jumpy, anxious, and prone to rescue. That's my idea around this. And you have your own brain issues. We don't have brain scans for y'all. But if we have brain scan day at Favorite, we're going to let you go through the machine too. But you have your own. Where trauma is concerned, the part of the brain that's really, really affected is the amygdala and the hippocampus, which is hyper-conditioned for this thing called fight or flight. And it happens through repetitive experiences. If you look at the definition, and I'll go back, this is right out of the DSM-5. Okay, this is right out of this, and this is related to trauma. And the third criteria, learning that traumatic events occurred to a close family member or a close friend, cases of actual or threatened death, violent or accidental. Tell me that's not living with an addict. That's the experience for family members who are living with somebody in active addiction. Not once, not twice, but nearly every single day when they're in active addiction. Would you guys agree with that? Until you start to get some perspective on it, until you start talking about it, as Mary Kay said, until you start learning about it, you're living through this over and over and over again. And so what I'm saying is that you're conditioning this part of your brain because you're repetitively exposed to these situations where you feel like you're going to lose your loved one's life or your loved one's going to wind up in jail. It's threatening toward them. This is a threatening situation. So you're conditioned to fight or flight. So when Mary Kay gets that phone call and hey, I can't pay my rent. You know, if I don't pay my rent, I'm moving out. What does her brain do? What happens? It activates. It activates. It shoots off. And what does it do? It starts thinking of all the scenarios that could go down from that point forward. It's not about paying the rent. What's it about? It's about if the rent doesn't get paid, what happens then? He's not going to have a place to live. And if he doesn't have a place to live, what's going to happen? He's going to go move in with that Rich Jones scumbag. And if he goes and moves in with that Rich Jones scumbag, we know Rich Jones deals drugs. And if he's living with a drug dealer, he's going to have all the drugs in the world. He's going to do more drugs. He's going to wind up dying from this thing. Do you guys follow that? And it's not like you sit down and you map that out or you think that through. It happens in the blink of an eye. You go from 0 to 60 in a millisecond. You go from that. How many people in here have gotten a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning and jumped? You know? How many people have sent a text to their loved one and not had a response from the text and find themselves completely 100% spun out? That's what's going on. Is there's something else happening inside of your brain. And what I'm here to tell you is that I believe that's a trauma response, not your codependent. Maybe you are. Maybe that. Hey, if y'all are comfortable with codependent, run with it. I got nothing against codependence. I love codependence. But to understand that this might be happening at a different level, at a subconscious level, at an automatic processing level, these neural pathways that are established over time, not returning a text message equals danger. Slurred speech equals danger. Talking to an ex-girlfriend who's a user equals danger. Do you guys follow all that stuff? Not having the rent paid equals danger. That's happening at a very, very base level. That's happening at almost a survival instinct level. Would anybody want to comment on this? Anybody have any experience that they would share related to this? And it's automatic. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is very true. I have a close friend that finally is at rehab, praise Jesus, but getting hopefully some help. But,
yeah.
He was my roommate, and I'm telling you, everything you're saying is so true. You do go into that trauma zone. And,
yeah.
The thing that I think that also happens and very easily is when you see them sick as a dog, you immediately want to help because of the you don't like them being sick or angry or and that is part of the things that you deal with when there's multiple addictions going on.
Absolutely.
And so I think you easily step in because sometimes you see that in our situation there was no insurance, so the financial side, every time you went to get help, sometimes you got only so far in the help zone.
Yeah.
So you end up thinking, well, if there's no help, then what else do you do to keep this manageable? And
So,
I think that's what, a lot of these, it's not that you're, I don't know if it's codependency or
it's all,
you're trying to solve the issue.
you're trying to help somebody survive. So it's this survival instinct. Now, what I'll tell you is, whether you call it codependency or whether you call it trauma, to a certain extent, when you start talking about the solutions start to get similar. Because what you got to understand with trauma, the idea would be every time you repetitively save that person, you're reinforcing that pathway. Do you guys get that? So whether it's codependency, where I'm so enmeshed that if they're happy, I'm happy. If they're sad, I'm sad. That's one way of looking at it. Or whether it's trauma, that whenever I'm triggered, I have this anxiety kind of response where I have to rescue them. It doesn't matter. The solution's very similar, and it's where you start monitoring yourself and changing your response to the person. Would you guys all agree with that? Whether you call it codependency or you call it trauma, the solution is very, very similar. The reason why I think it's important to explore whether or not it's trauma is it's how you frame it up in your mind. I have this experience with people, guys, and again, this is just my take, where people will come in and see me, and they'll sit down and we'll sit in the office and they'll be talking. It'll be mom talking about something, and they'll look at me and they'll almost say this with a sense of guilt. I am the world's worst codependent. That's what they'll say. And I feel like I want to tell you guys something. I don't want you to label yourselves anything that you perceive as negative. Don't put these negative labels on yourself. If you guys follow what I'm saying? You're not a bad person. You're not a bad mom or a bad dad because you've rescued somebody at some point, or you paid the rent at some point. You may have to change those behaviors. You actually do need to change those behaviors. You need to change those behaviors for yourself. You need to change those behaviors for your pocketbook. But you're not the world's quote-unquote worst codependent. So there's this vibe around this that I'm really encouraging us to think differently about as we go forward. All right, we talked about this. This all falls into the process of trauma. Again, I'm just sort of preaching to the choir with you guys. I think y'all get that. Do you get the idea that it could be a trauma response? One of the other things is this idea of loss of a loved one, right? Loss of a loved one is one of the worst things that we can go through. No one would really argue with us on this. But what about the anticipated loss of a loved one? So there's another phenomenon that goes on in family recovery that we really got to be honest about, and we got to try to help people figure out a way to deal with. When you're dealing with somebody who's in a deep-end addiction, you're constantly on your toes for that phone call. And that in and of itself can be traumatic. That reality in and of itself can be traumatic when you're sort of waiting for the other shoe to fall. And learning to deal with that and learning to try to, and again, I think it's disingenuous to look at anybody and say, step back from that. I don't know how you step back from that. But trying to change your approach to that and your mentality around that so that you can kind of get through, and it doesn't keep you up the way at night that it used to. And it doesn't ruin you the way that it ruined you. But we really know in today's world, I mean, we just talked about it earlier tonight, that this threat is there where addiction is concerned. And our thinking is we always go to worst case scenario. I shouldn't say that. A lot of us go to worst case scenario. Whenever the incident goes down, we don't think about the other alternatives where the person could get back in recovery, or maybe they'll wind up in jail, but they'll still be alive and that'll be okay. Where do we go? We go right to the end of the line, because the end of the line is real. So we have to be very, very aware of that natural part of the thinking. And what we have to do is we have to try to find a way to process things. So you got to think about it as stuck material. So your past experiences get stuck. They get unprocessed. And where addiction is concerned, a lot of your past experiences get unprocessed because you don't talk about it. Why don't you talk about it, guys? Because it's embarrassing, right? Because it's not the kind of thing you talk about at Sunday school class. It's not the kind of thing you talk about in the workplace. It's not the kind of thing that you talk to your neighbor about. So you're having all these experiences where you're terrified. You're having all these experiences where you're getting calls in the middle of the night. You're going down, you got to bail somebody out of jail. And you may not have anyone to talk to about it. We process events by talking about them. I think we've talked about this in here before, but if something traumatic happens, like if I leave this room and I go outside and there's two guys fighting and I have to break it up and it was life-threatening, and I come in here and I talk to you guys about it, that's me processing it. If I go home and talk to my wife about it, that's me processing it. But where addiction's concerned, what we've done for years, now I think we're getting better at this, and you guys are here tonight, so hopefully you're ahead of the curve on this, but we don't talk about it because it's shameful. Because addiction is what? The person living under the bridge and the guy drinking out of the brown paper bag. So we have to fight through that and find places to talk about it. Where do we talk about it? So you can talk about it here, right? Where else can you talk about it? So you can get a counselor. You can get. So this is sort of where we would kind of like make some direct suggestions around family recovery and sort of taking care of yourself. One would be try to become part of a group. There's something about being in a group where you get a bunch of different information. You get to hear from a lot of different people. You get to hear a lot of different people's experiences around this issue. We'd also recommend that you find somebody to talk to individually. Where can you find an individual person? You can get a person here as a coach, but you can also get a counselor. Where else can you find people to talk to? Anybody else have any other suggestions?
I was told, I went through that phase of not wanting to talk to anybody, and finally I was like, you know what? I've got to talk to people because otherwise I'm going to go crazy. So I started talking to friends, colleagues, and it was amazing how many people came out of the closet and started saying, oh, I have a friend, I have a family member, I have this person. And I was like, well, why aren't we talking about this more? Because, this could help a lot of people.
Oh, there's a lot of, like when you start to get into this, there are a lot of people affected by this that may not be open about being affected by it, but it's probably a lot more than you would expect. You would probably be surprised about how many people are dealing with these type of issues. It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all. Where else can you find people to talk to?
Good friends.
Find good friends, people that you can trust. It's got to be the right people. You got to be careful. If it's a toxic person, it's going to get very, very difficult. Unprocessed trauma manifests itself by excessive worry, anxiety, stress, and fear. Have you ever felt like you were walking on eggshells around your loved one? What's that all about? What are you afraid of? Saying the wrong thing, right? Doing the wrong thing. What are you afraid is going to happen if you say or do the wrong thing? Drive them to use, right? I mean, I've heard people say this, I got to be careful. If I don't do this right, how do I know I'm not putting too much pressure on the person? They may use. Also, you got to be careful because sometimes you're walking on eggshells because they'll flip out. Yeah. I mean, they keep the drywall contractors in business. I mean, come on, man. How many young dudes like to punch holes in drywall? They're explosive. Why are people so explosive when they're in addiction? Because of all the things that I showed you around the brain. So you really are in a situation where not only are you psychologically kind of conditioned in that way, there's a very real issue where the person may go off. So you're walking around in eggshells. Were you going to say something about that?
Yeah, there's another one that we've experienced that I'm going to call escapism, and that is you just act like whatever's going on is not going on.
Okay, good. Okay, very good. So you guys hear this? So remember what we said, it's fight or flight. So the flight part would be avoidance. And just 100%, it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. Blissfully in denial. How many people have ever been in blissfully in denial? Sometimes I feel bad about taking away people's denial. Because denial can theoretically be a good place to be for a while, right? Everything's fine. I mean, I know people in my life that are in denial about all kinds of different things. And let them enjoy their denial. But the danger with that is obvious, right? So you kind of like have to find a way to kind of get the blinders off. What happened? You think men are better at getting the blinders off?
No, they keep them on. They stick their head in the hole.
Oh, easy there, Linda. Easy there. I've never been in denial about anything in my life.
And you women agree with me?
Yes.
So you could have gender differences in terms of taking the blinders off. Why do people put the blinders on, though? They're trying to avoid the emotional pain around realizing what's happening, right? You're trying. It's too much to look at directly.
It's too painful.
It's too painful to look at directly. I think that can take on many different roles. How do you get through that? If you feel like you've gone through that yourselves, what has helped you get through the situation and look at it more honestly? Anybody share any advice around breaking through denial or helping someone else break through denial? I think education matters, right? Counseling, therapy. Prayer absolutely helps. Learning about it. I think the other thing is that if you can identify what it is, what the fear is that's keeping you from looking directly at it. And a lot of times it's some of the stuff we talked about. I fear the worst, Rich. Sometimes it's not the worst, though. Sometimes it's some kind of other process. It's going to blow up. If you can get in touch with what the fear is that's keeping you from looking directly at it, maybe then you can take a closer look at it. That kind of thing. Mary Kay?
I know for me, because I did not have any substance use disorder in my immediate family growing up, I really was blinded by all of it, blinded by it. So once I realized what was going on with my son, and got the education and started to learn about it, it helped me tremendously to be able to still help him, but help him in a good, healthy way by learning that I couldn't fix the disease.
Yeah.
And because I really had no personal experience, I just knew that I needed, if anything, to direct him to people who could help him, who had been where he was.
So do you think the denial, like if you look at the term denial around family issues, do you think the denial is denying that it's as serious as it is? Do you think that's what's going on? Or is the denial just what you're saying? Let's just avoid even looking at this at all. But do you feel like you looked at your situation and said, this isn't that bad?
At the beginning, of course. Yeah.
At the beginning,
yeah.
If you could go back and redo your life, or redo that segment of your life, you would say, I should have noticed something here?
Yes.
So is that something that resonates with other people in the room? Suzanne?
Well, I was going to say, if it's starting with a young person who's a teenager or young in college, a young person, it's so easy for parents to be in denial because so many kids are doing this now.
That's what I was kind of getting at. Yeah.
So many doing it, but you don't really truly know it's a problem. You just think, well, they're out there partying like the rest of the kids.
Yeah.
And they're going to outgrow it, just
and it's behavioral, and they're immature, and eventually they're going to outgrow it, and they're going to go.
I think there's two things. I think one is exactly what Suzanne is saying. It's everybody's getting hammered. Everybody's snorting Adderall. Everybody's going to the infirmary and getting a hold of pills. Everybody's buying cocaine on the weekend. They're 20 years old. What do you expect? That's what they do. That's one thing. The second thing is, okay, it's a problem. What the hell do we even do about it? Like, there's this idea of, like, what's the answer if I do say something? Do you guys get that part of it? I think there's this thing that goes on subconsciously for us when we don't confront something as parents, where there's this doubt on what the heck am I going to do about it anyway? So, okay, yeah, it's a problem, but how do I get my 20-year-old who's at Clemson or wherever to stop using anyway? So all we're going to do here is create a fight. So a lot of it comes back to how do you talk about it? How do you talk about it? So I'm about to share something that certainly isn't blowing up anybody's privacy because I posted it all over Instagram. But Thanksgiving Day, I'm in my kitchen doing my thing. I'm recording a video because that's what I do. I record videos. And in it, my 19-year-old daughter says, my 21-year-old daughter says to my 19-year-old daughter, last year you were hungover during Thanksgiving. And I'm like, whoa! Whoa! I am the executive director of Favor Greenville. There can be none of that going on. So, basically, And here's what I found, guys. I'm just being honest with you. I had no idea what to say to her. So literally, it came out right then and there, okay? So that means she was 18. She was out drinking on Thanksgiving break. And I'm sure that wasn't the first time she drank. So what do I say about that? I was at a loss for words. What's the good way to say that? So I start talking to her about it. What I find is that I break off into the therapist talk, right? Here I go. Rich the therapist comes out. She just looks at me like, you're so full of shit, man. And she like does the thing where she like sort of like looks at me and stuff, but the whole time I know she's thinking like, whatever, Dad, right? So I'm kind of lost. At that point, I'm lost as to what to do. And that would keep me, I could see that keeping me from, or making me put the blinders on, because you feel completely incompetent to deal with it. Because what do you say? Don't ever drink again? What are they going to say? Yes, sir? And then what do? Hire a private investigator to follow them around and see whether they are or not? What's that? Go ahead, ma'am.
There's an app for that.
Well, even if they do, what do you do?
And even if they do, what do you do? Yes.
Well, I was just going to say, I think your kid don't understand that they're different, any different than their other friends, and why can't I drink and do everything that everybody else is doing? Why am I different? I think the kids see it that way. They don't understand it either when they're starting.
No, you're exactly right. You guys hear that point? Like for them, it's even more puzzling. Like, what are you like literally, what are you talking about? Now, you can get into situations where you try to do a little bit of like education around the seriousness of it. Some of the stuff that we were talking about earlier around the pills, where you try to get into how dangerous it is. In my case, I'm very open and obviously about my recovery and about the biological vulnerability of it and things like that. But I mean, I was sitting there afterwards, and you know what I really, really came to this very, very stark realization, and I don't know why it happened on Thanksgiving, and it's really naive of me, but I was like, holy crap, I really don't know what they're doing when they're not at home. Right? I mean, duh. But you really don't know. And you have no way you can't put a lid on that and keep people from doing that. So I think what we got to do is we got to find a way to kind of have those conversations and support one another through those conversations and figure out what is the way. So what's my goal then? What does my goal become? My goal becomes to try to move the needle on this process. I'm not going to hammer anybody at that point. I'm not going to retroactively ground her. You follow me? Or turn this into like a DEFCON 5 situation. But how do I have a conversation that might move the needle on her thinking around this particular issue? That's what we got to figure out ways to be strategic. Because here's the truth. A lot of these guys, a lot of these kids, if you will kind of come out the other end of this. There is truth to that. So we got to try to keep, we can't go to that worst case scenario kind of thinking. But it's very hard not to. Yes, Carol.
So if you have a teenager come in and say, and they're drunk, and this is the first time you've realized it, and what do you say?
I don't think you say anything when they're drunk.
Okay,
the
next day.
The next day you sit down, and I think you got to try to get them to talk to you. You got to say, "Tell me what happened. Tell me about last night. Tell me what happened." And you got to let them tell you and stuff like that. And they're not going to tell you the whole thing. They're just simply not going to tell you everything. Dialogue. And then I would have a conversation with them that went something like, what do you think about it? Are you just going to keep drinking? Like, what's your plan here? What do you think about it? I wouldn't break off a speech. And I didn't break off a speech. I posted it on Instagram. Yes.
I'm actually recovering myself, and when I was that age, I knew my family had a predisposition to addiction. And, my mentality was it won't happen to me.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, my sister here, she's fine.
Yeah.
I'm the black sheep. So
yeah. So am I, brother. I'm with you.
But so it's like, how do you, as a father now, how do you kind of plant the seed to?
Yeah. I think the thing is that you got to make it an okay conversation. If you stand any chance with it, it's got to be something that they can talk about. And then the question becomes, do they get to talk about it with amnesty? Like if they tell you what's going on, is there a punishment coming on the other end, or do you let that ride? Those are the type of conversations, and you got to have that conversation with both mom and dad in the room, that kind of thing. You know, you got to get to this point where it's not where somehow we got to get people taught. We got to get kids age 18 to 30. I'm saying kids. I call that 18 to 30, 16 to 30, 14 to 30, whatever it is, talking about this without the heaviness of it. Because we're not going to talk about it if I got to tell you I'm an alcoholic. I'm not going to, but I might talk about it if we can just rap about it. You follow me? I don't even know if they use that word, rap about it. If we can just chill. Yes?
I think also one is putting the ownership and the consequences where they belong. I mean, that's something we're slowly moving the needle on. If my son comes in and trashes the house, well, then cops are going to be called and he may get put in jail. Well, he owns that behavior.
Yeah. Do you guys hear that? So the idea would be, the other part of it would be to allow the consequences to fall where they may. And that could be real concrete stuff. It could be, if the person is aggressive in your home, you call the police yourself. It could also be, if they get a DUI, you don't bail them out of jail. You know, those type of things. That's where you're sort of like putting the ball back in their court. What other suggestions about this particular dynamic might be helpful?
I was going to mention, because the person I was dealing with was a friend, we did do a lot of conversing about things. And a lot of things that I would start with open-ended questions helped a lot. But one thing that, if you have an addict that's very sensitive, many times they can feel your emotions, even if you're not saying anything. And I would go into anger, even though I wouldn't be expressing it, and they could tell, and it would be like a closeout. So you have to be very careful to not go into it with strong emotions, I would say. Try to keep your anger sometimes at bay if you really want to find out their heart.
So it's mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. You know, you want people to receive the message, so probably the less amount of emotion, the better. That's just how human beings are. If you come at me too hardcore, I'm probably going to push back. Yes?
We were just talking before he went into counseling, my mother called, he's 20 years old, I'm away from home. My mom called and said, do you think she said, what do you think? And I said, well, he's not doing anything anybody else is doing at his age. He's 20 years old. And she said, do you think he has a problem? I said, well, ask him.
Yeah.
And so she said, do you think you have a problem? And I think the response was, what does that look like? And then it was like, game on.
No, I think you got to talk about it. I say this all the time about my experience. I was always on the verge of everything falling apart. Getting kicked off of this athletic team, getting kicked off of that athletic team. You know, I was always able to negotiate it and make it work, right? I always got through. But and what would happen is I would have these series of conflicts, usually with my mom. She used to say, you need help. You need help. And it was always in the middle of the crap hitting the fan. And it was never in a conversation. I don't begrudge my mom at all. My mom figured it out then, believe me. She went and got educated and, you know, boundaried up pretty good down the road there. But at that time, she was reacting from emotion. And you know what? No one ever had a conversation with me. The great irony of my life is all I do is talk to people all day about this issue, no matter what stage you're in. But nobody ever talked to me until I declared I was an alcoholic at the age of 32. Now, would I have changed something at the age of 25 if somebody would have sat down and talked to me? I can't sit here and say that for sure, but I remember many occasions being like, something's wrong in my head, right? I was like, this is not, but I had no words for it. I had no, and my buddies certainly weren't going to tell me it was a problem. My buddies weren't going to say, like, Rich, while we were all doing shots of tequila, I think you're drinking too much. That conversation was not going to occur. So, but it's very hard as a family member to have a calm conversation with somebody that you're watching self-destruct, right? It's very, very hard to have a calm conversation with your son or your daughter and just maintain a cool outlook. I don't know if anybody in here has ever had to have a conversation with a 16-year-old pot smoker. If you want to punch somebody in the forehead, try that one time. You know, oh, dude, man, it's just like, listen, dude, it's like cannabis sativa, man, and it's like, if it's making you tired, dude, it's because it's not the right stuff, man. Just got to get the right stuff. You know, and so if you're going to have that conversation, you're gonna have to be in the right mindset. You're going to have to be in the right mindset, because what will happen is you'll lash out. You'll lash out and you'll want to shake them. And then if you do that, what are they going to do? They're going to push back. And everything you just said, you might have had the best advice in the world, but everything you just said did what? It hit a brick wall, and it was just deflected the other way. So have the conversation, but try to have it in a way where they're actually going to hear you. Don't blame yourself for it. I like this quote: when tragedies strike, we try to find someone to blame, and in the absence of a suitable candidate, we usually blame ourselves. So if you can't figure out anyone else to put this on, you'll put this whole situation on yourself. And remember, if this is addiction, it goes way beyond what you did right and what you did wrong. Do you follow me? It goes way beyond that. It's a brain issue. It's a brain disease. It's a whole different ball of wax. Now, you can learn about this, and you can start to do things differently. One of the takeaways I want to make sure I give you tonight, like as you're going through this, if you start to change any part of your interaction with the person, it doesn't have to be, even if you're not really ready to do major changes, even if you change the way you talk to them. Let's say, for example, that your relationship with the person over the last 6 months has been conflictual. Like basically it's just based on argument. Buy them a cake and bring it home tonight and say, here, this is for you. You will freak them the hell out. They will not know what's going on. They'll be like, what the hell's Mom doing, man?
Something's in that cake.
Something's in that cake, man. I'm going to eat that thing and pass out, and I'm going to wake up in Utah in some wilderness program. You're doing some kind of damn vision quest with the Indian. Yep. And yeah. So do something different. Change the way you talk. Change the way you talk, and try to put the ball in their court. Just switch it up a little bit. You got to remember, we're used to, what happens is we fall into these rules and these roles, and we sort of all do our thing. You know, the addict's job is to act up and cause problems. Mom's job is to confront. The addict's job is to push back. If you start changing the dynamic around that, and you just start changing things a little bit, then what's going to happen is that the person's going to subtly notice that, and their wheels are going to start spinning. Something's different. Let them know that you're coming here, too, along with that. Say things like, I went over to Favor Greenville tonight. They're talking about this issue. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I know I'm going to do something. And then don't say anything else after that. Let them go up in your room and sit there and try to figure out what kind of diabolical plot you have. You're just trying to change these very predictable patterns that exist. You're trying to do something different. And don't blame yourself. As Mary Kay had said earlier, there's nothing that you can do that's going to make the person use or not use. That's not what's going on. Again, you might want to change some things. So, a couple things to deal with the trauma and the anxiety around this stuff. Just going to go through some of these real quick, and then we'll wrap it up for tonight, guys. Different techniques, different exercises or skills you can use. Progressive muscle relaxation. Go to YouTube. You can YouTube it, and they'll show you how to do it. But it's basically this process of de-stressing yourself. You literally are squeezing your muscles and then releasing them. The best example is with your hands. Whenever you do it, you can kind of feel it in your forearms. And if you get in one of these videos, they'll say, it'll be somebody with a really soothing voice. Hold, 2, 3, 4, release. And then you'll do that, and that is shown to kind of like release stress. It's called progressive muscle relaxation. Just go to YouTube and you can get that. Breathing exercises. That's me in the morning. I didn't know my wife took that picture. So it's just, that's freaky. I didn't even notice that guy on there. apps. There are apps that help you with breathing exercises. A couple that come to mind. One is called Headspace, which is a 10-minute guided meditation. If you sit down, it'll take you through different breathing exercises. Breathing in meditation, it's been shown to help with stress and help with anxiety and chronic worry and things like that. I don't do this every day, but I believe this does work. This is one of the most common things. Anybody have any experience with meditation? So try to get into a routine around that. Yoga. I'm not a big fan of yoga, as you probably can tell. But yoga, I don't know why you'll be able to tell that. Also, this is another practice that can help with de-stressing. Guided imagery is interesting. Guided imagery is a process of, so the best example I can give you is around visualizing your favorite place in the world. So you just go through an exercise and you kind of like, you close your eyes and you picture yourself there. A lot of times guided imagery is done with somebody talking you through it. A therapist will do it, but you don't even have to do that. It's trying to find, what you're looking for any kind of skill that's going to help calm you down. So your favorite place in the world or whatever that may be. Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Cleveland Browns. It's 59-0 at halftime. Right? That kind of deal. Anybody watch the Steeler game last night? How about that? And I'll tell you what, that is a franchise there. When you can win, even when you don't bring your A game like that, that has nothing to do with family recovery, though. Other things that can help. Music, sound, soothing sound. Sometimes, like even if it's like the noise of the waves and things like that. If you get a sound machine, people will talk about putting that on when they sleep. That can help with stress. That can help de-stress. Scented candles, smell. How many people in here are into like the aromatherapy kind of deal? You know, go get yourself a hold of one of these Tai Chi vanilla cinnamon candles. Fire that baby up. Huff that thing. Probably the wrong thing to say.
Huffing meant something way different.
Yes, it did. So the smell brings you back to a pleasant thought, a pleasant day. Also, essential oils, sometimes with this. Massage therapy, acupuncture. I'm not sure what taste means. Plow through a box of donuts. Now, there's also this idea of acceptance, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this tonight. And I didn't get into acceptance and commitment therapy as much as I wanted to. But we're conditioned to run from negative feelings. In a Western society, we're conditioned to run from negative feelings. Like if you feel bad, that's part of the problem with pain pills, right? If you feel pain, take a pain pill. If you're feeling any kind of negative emotion, take a pill and escape that. This idea of trying to, whenever the bad feelings are coming on you, to acknowledge and notice the feelings and not try to run from them. Not try to avoid them. They're going to pass. The anxiety is going to pass. The worry is going to pass. It's not going to stay on you forever. And rather than trying to, it's not that I don't want you to cope with the feelings, but I also, sometimes we have to just be able to sit in the bad stuff. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. We're not conditioned to do that. We're conditioned to run the other way. We're conditioned to kind of escape that. The problem is sometimes you can't escape that. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes this particular issue just hurts like hell. It just hurts like hell. And I know for sure that that's what it was like for my family. I've gone through that with my kids. I've been there where I've laid in bed and stared at the ceiling and I could not conceive how this was going to turn out well. There was no way, no matter what angle I thought about it or what angle I looked at it, that this was going to end well. And it's this idea that whenever you're stuck in that spot, when it's really, really dark, that fighting against it can sometimes even make it worse. Instead of just riding it out. Principle of acceptance. Radical acceptance. This is what it is for the time being. I'm going to quit thinking about how I change this. I'm going to quit thinking about like every different angle or conceivable outcome from this situation. I'm just going to embrace this for what it is right now and try to move through it. And again, this is around acceptance. Empowerment we sort of talked about. if you're going to get a therapist, these are some of the qualities of a good therapist, as a good trauma therapist. One of the things about a therapist, how do I want to say this? If you get a therapist, you should feel comfortable talking to them. That's an ingenious thing to say, right? But it's actually very, very true. If you have a therapist and you don't feel comfortable with them, get a different therapist, like tomorrow. Feel very, very comfortable firing your therapist. You know, don't do it don't do it like just out of hand. But if you're going to see somebody one-on-one, you want it to be a positive experience. You want to feel better when you come out of there than you did before, when you walked in. If you can find other support one-on-one, whether that's a coach or a sponsor or a good friend, as other people, you can't really fire your good friend. This is more if you're looking for a therapist. The reason why I'm talking about or encouraging you guys to consider that one-on-one support, I just think in some of these situations and some of this stuff that you're dealing with, it might just be very, very helpful to be able to have that person that you can vent to. We have coaches here. They're not therapists. They're not going to take you through any of the trauma. They're not going to help you resolve any of that. But they will listen. They will listen to you if you want to process things. And again, you can also look for a sponsor. You could also look for, maybe somebody, a mentor or somebody like that, somebody who's been through this before, that kind of thing. I won't go through this part of it. So, all right, guys, does anybody else have any final comments or thoughts related to what we talked about tonight? If you haven't been here on a regular, quote-unquote, Monday night, come check us out next week. It's a little bit of a different format. We kind of circle up the chairs, and it's an open discussion. We don't have a topic. I don't do a PowerPoint. We sort of talk about this. I want to tell you that I went through, and I've looked at everyone's suggestions around this, and we're seriously considering whether or not we would do breakout groups, because some of y'all talked about the idea of smaller groups, and maybe we could have 2 groups going on simultaneously in the building. We'd have to figure out exactly how we structured that. So we probably are going to need to revisit that as a group and talk about exactly what would that look like. How would we break out? Would it be people who are dealing with a crisis versus people who have been in this thing for a while? We want to be able to provide these services, guys, in whatever way is most useful. Does anybody else have any other announcements or anything related to? Yes.
Is all this information available on your website?
It is. All this information is on my Facebook page.
Okay.
Now, if you go to my Facebook page and you pull it up and you want to look at any of these slides, all you do is hit pause because it's on a running loop. I will tell you one other thing. I'm constructing a family page on my Cartel website, www.recoverycartel.com. Okay, if you go to that, there's literally a family link which will take you to all my videos. Okay, I have about 47 videos. I have a YouTube channel too called Recovery Cartel. All kinds of different subjects on there. And yes.
Because I'm usually here, I have never watched it from home. But how do you watch it from home?
All you do is go to my Facebook page, and Carol, I'm stunned that you're not aware of this.
I know.
And go to my Facebook page, and it's posted on there. So as soon as we're done, I will post this.
I went there. I mean, I'm talking about the live presentation.
It'll be on there tonight. I'll post it as soon as we're done here.
So it's not going on right now?
It is going on right now. As a matter of fact, there's probably people on there right now. Yes. So, yes. And then after this is over, I have to hit post, and then it gets posted there, and it's there forever.
Okay, gotcha.
You guys get that? So if you want to watch this again, I don't know why you would want to do that. Or if you want to send somebody to it, that would be a better example. Yep. All right. If that's all we have, guys, if we can close this thing, get a moment of silence for those still suffering, and for the family members brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, guys. Thank you very much.